hot seat. They are live streaming, and then we'll have you do hot seats after. But I'll double check with her to make sure everybody. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, no, sure.
All right, yeah. Okay.
Are we hot?
Hello? I get it why people sweat when they're on stage.
Yeah.
It's very warm.
Toasty. Come and dress for Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna be making sure. Yeah, it's all right. There you go. Yeah. Are we good? Yep. All right. Well, unfortunately, it's me again. My name is Josh Ayers. I'm with the University of Exeter in the UK. I'm on the Nature and Climate Impact team. I'm the Senior Research Impact Fellow focused on food systems. We're funded by Andre and Rosalie Hoffman. And if you happen to be walking by the culture plots across from the Hotel Europe, you'll see a giant monkey statue. Swing by and say hello. We've got programming going on all week there. But today, I've got my friends joining me to talk about democratizing agricultural intelligence through AI. And let's see, let's start with Dr. Srikanth Thudumu. He's the lead architect of OpenAg, which you'll hear more about during the session, at the Institute of Applied Artificial Intelligence and Robotics. We have Jason Fisher next to me, the founder and executive director of the Institute. In the middle, we have Perrine Bouhana. She's the director at GlobeScan. And we have Dr. Jasbir at the University of Memphis. He's the executive vice president of research and innovation. Thank you all for joining us. And I thought, given Perrine's global remit, I thought it would be great if she could start us off with some insights and outline sort of the sheer scale of the challenge that we face today with AI and agriculture.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying Davos so far. So my name is Perrine Bouhana. I'm a director at GlobeScan. We're an insights and advisory consultancy working on all topics related to sustainability, trust, and engagement. And since our founding, since the late 80s, we've been tracking public opinion data, stakeholder perspectives, perspectives on the sustainability agenda. What are the hot issues? What's blocking us from progress, and how can we accelerate? And so thinking about the sheer scale of the challenge, just a few figures to set the scene. I think it's the World Food Programme's global outlook for this year is clearly stating that about 318 million people will suffer from severe hunger this year. And that's double what we had 7 years ago. So it's a very acute crisis. If you add on to this chronic food insecurity, we reach about 670 million people. That's a huge number. And food insecurity, we see it every day in the news. Actually, we have 6 countries, mostly in Africa, that are on the border of famine. And you've probably seen that over the past few months. Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, Palestine, Mali, and Haiti, the only country that's not in Africa. So sheer scale of the challenge, the FAO is calling us for a global call for emergency. About $2.5 billion of aid, food aid, is asked for. So that's the sheer scale of the challenge. And when we speak to sustainability experts through our regular surveys to take the pulse of what is it that they're looking at from a sustainability standpoint, clearly they're seeing as climate change is top of the agenda, but food insecurity is right up there. In Africa, our sustainability expert placed it on equal footing with climate change. And what they're telling us is that they're frustrated with the slow progress that we're making, and I'm sure we'll talk about the solutions today. So what we did last year to try and identify how can we truly unlock progress, we went to full range of sustainability experts from government, businesses, academia, civil society, and we asked them what are the key levers of action, whether these be from business, government, as in policy, civil society actions, what are the key actions that will be most feasible to unlock, to activate, and that will help us effectively address the sustainability challenges ahead of us. The number one solution that came up was technology innovation, by far, well ahead of regulations, compliance, for example, and all of those things. However, when we tested AI, it was seen as highly feasible, yet slightly less impactful. So we got to ask ourselves what's missing. And I got to think of this quote from Clayton Christensen that some of you in the US may know, the father of disruptive innovation. Technology cannot drive change alone, right? It's the people using the technology and the systems around that enable them that will drive change. And so when we think of people, we think immediately of farmers, right? They're the ones that will be using the technology. In our research, whenever we ask the general public who is responsible for addressing sustainability issues, whether it be about climate, nature, food security, we ask them about several institutions. We ask about government, business, the UN, investors, themselves, farmers. Farmers always come down at the very bottom of the list as who they see as the most responsible. Who is most responsible? It's the very institutions, the government, the businesses, and the broader institutions. So how can we together discuss that, yes, we have the technology, but that alone won't solve it. How can we put in place the right systems to enable that? And I'll just finish off on a note of optimism. I painted a pretty grim picture of Africa at the start, but that's actually where the region where we see the greatest optimism about where the world is going, the potential of technology to solve people's problems every day, and about the green transition. So clearly, if there is one region where we can, deploy technology effectively through the right systems, and for it to be embraced with hope and optimism, that's the place to be. So I'll pause there for the context, and here we go for a good discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, that's excellent. Jason, she just laid out this global food crisis, right? 318 million people facing severe hunger in 2026. What's the connection between that crisis and the need to democratize agricultural AI? Why is this not just nice to have, but why is this essential?
Thank you. Good question. So food security is national security. And so therefore every nation, it's a prerogative for them. One of the people that's not joining us today on the panel because he couldn't be here is Richard Lackey with the World Food Bank. And basically what he thinks about every day is every country is either producing more food than they need and therefore they can export it, or there's a country that doesn't produce enough food and needs to import it. And there's challenges with all the geopolitics and things like that, sometimes of getting food where it needs to be, and that's another issue that's here. But one of the questions is why in Africa, where we have 66% of the world's arable agricultural land, are they not feeding the rest of the world and the world's sending food to them? And oftentimes it's because they don't necessarily know how to farm. They want to farm, they try to farm, but they don't have the technical services experts to do that. And so in one of the organizations, Foundations for Farming, has trained 1.6 million farmers around the world in regenerative ag. Those farms have over a foot of what I would say is topsoil there. That's basically 400-year-old farms in some cases that are doing that. So in many ways we need to learn from them. But more than that, the rest of Africa needs also to learn from them, okay? And so how do we democratize that intelligence and train AI systems on that? Because when you train AI systems, they're biased naturally. And I'll end with this three things that you need to think about. What do we need to sustain life? We need three things, okay? We need air, and nobody's figured out how to tax or charge people to breathe, okay? We need water, and water is always a local issue or regional issue, okay? But food is a global issue. There's global food supply chains that are there, and at the end of the day, I believe that the intelligence that we need to give farmers should not be controlled by a corporation or a few corporations or governments. It needs to be open for the rest of the world to have freely available for them to get the best information that they can as a farmer to know how to farm on their land.
Right. Yeah, excellent points. And I think, so Srikanth, I want to push back on something people in the room might assume, that is the barrier to solving all of this a technology problem? Or is there something else blocking us? What else are we struggling with?
So, yes and no. I'll tell you a reason. So let's take a few examples. We currently have AI systems such as large language models like ChatGPT and all that stuff. So if you were to ask a question, would you get an answer, a right answer for a specific situation or a specific context? Not really, because the answers are based on some predictions. So what we really need to have is very generic, not a very generic AI model, but a very contextualized version of it. So the foundations for building the technology has been there, but the technology to make contextualized version of those models is not yet there. So and the foundations are actually needed for us to build that technology. So the real barrier is not really the technology. We already have all those foundations. It's an integration problem, and we need more resources. We need the support from farmers. We need support from universities. We need support from government. And yeah.
Great. So, Jasbir, you lead research and innovation at a major university in the heart of the AI revolution happening in the United States right now, Memphis, Tennessee. From an institutional standpoint, what would need to shift for research institutions, companies, and governments to actually prioritize democratized AI over proprietary models that most of us are familiar with?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And let me start with the times of today, right? So much transformation is going on, both politically, technology-wise, and so many other ways. Now, two industries, two segments. One is how do universities fund research? In the US now, our national research funding system is going through a massive transformation. Now, in the international aid sector as well, there's a huge transformation going on, And in both these circumstances, I look at those segments and I say, this is an opportunity now. We need to break the old models, internationally. And on the international aid perspective, I think it's a time to kind of focus on not building dependency in aid, but now helping farmers, helping others out there to fish for themselves and farm for themselves. And the second thing is in the research funding system is, too long, large private universities with large endowments, right, cornered the market for research funding. This is the moment for Carnegie R1 research universities, public research universities in the US, for example, the University of America. It's time for us to step forward and say, we are going to take on this challenge, this responsibility we have had for a long time, public service for the public good. So I'm here actually I'm excited about Open Ag, because this is the time when we are going to help the Open Ag and the community build an international collaboration, because, I'll tell you something about the internet. Remember when the internet first came, there was all this talk about how decentralizing it was going to be. But because we didn't step up as a community of global citizens, it became more centralized than, we wanted it to be. Now, AI is here today. And I'm part of that. As a matter of fact, my PhD was on AI in 1990s. You know what I mean? Now, with AI, let's not lose. Let's not be, it's time for us to wake up and say, we are going to do what it takes to decentralize, the power of this technology and have impact where it matters. Like, for example, farmers all over the world. So again, this is a call for public universities to come join Open Ag. And decentralize, the benefits of this new technology.
Great, yeah. So the stakes, I think, are clear. I think the barriers, as we've heard, are apparently solvable. So Jason, let's make this concrete. Tell us a story. What does democratized agricultural intelligence look like in practice?
So we have spent, let me go back a step. In March of last year, we wrote a well-researched paper which was called Open Ag, Democratizing Agricultural Intelligence, and it was widely received by the academic communities and universities and things like that. And Then we started rolling in universities that were, I would call, early adopters, universities that either I or Srikanth or others, such as Richard Lackey, had good, strong connections with. Exeter University was an early one as well. And so we started bringing in and starting to create a consortium on that, knowing that, well, ultimately what we need is universities around the world. And so we brought in African universities. And so we've been working on that in that regard. Then we got to get the government on board. And fortunately, we have made a lot of good progress in the past quarter, I'd say, with organizations such as USDA. A lot of people don't know, but in the United States under Abraham Lincoln, we started land-grant universities where we gave, I think it was 2 universities back in the 1860s, like 30,000 acres of land, and said, the government's giving you this land, you start an agriculture university, train people in your state how to grow agriculture and support themselves. And now every state in the United States has multiple ag grant universities, including a state as small as Hawaii, okay? So what we want to do is we want to work with organizations like USDA and the Senate to fund those land-grant universities to train local small-scale models on local agriculture, the way they grow in Hawaii, crops that grow well in Hawaii, the way a Montana rancher ranches in Montana, which would be different than the way a rancher in Romania ranches. You follow? So it is super important that we don't generalize and we just take all this research and then all of a sudden you're getting such general information as a rancher that's not contextual that bad decisions would be made. And we got this phrase in the U.S. and it's probably pretty universal around the world, don't bet the farm. Because if you screw up, you lost the farm. And the worst thing in the world we want to happen is for a farmer that's making a decision based upon an AI model that is not 100% correct.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's super clear. Srikanth, there are dozens, maybe more, of ag tech solutions out there, right? So what makes open ag, what Jason just began to describe, what makes open ag different?
Yeah, there are many tools, absolutely, but they are very specific to one particular problem. Like, for example, let's say there's a problem with identifying insecticides using drones. So the tools that we got in the current market, they'll only be focusing on only on that particular problem, or maximum of 2. So we were in a conference last year, and there was this question from one of the farmers. So when we showed this open ag, so after the presentation, he came to us and said, hey, this looks so cool because I don't need to go to different platforms to identify different issues. So, and to be strictly speaking, open ag is not it's not a platform or it's not a tool, it's an ecosystem. So it has got various different features. For example, one of the toughest things that we try to capture in this open ag system is the tacit knowledge. And what do I mean by tacit knowledge? So tacit knowledge is it's not experiential knowledge. So for someone who never ate an apple, how do you explain the taste of it, right? So it's really hard to capture. So farmers would be having some sort of that tacit knowledge. And these so-called large language models, if we were to ask a question, you might not end up getting a correct answer. Let's say we got a situation, a farmer having thousands of acres of land, and there is a situation related to his farming. Would he be asking ChatGPT and taking a decision out of it? No way, right? So he needs some expertise answer. So Jason likes to put it as a PhD expertise. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build several different modules out of it and then try to integrate everything. It's like we got data sitting from various sources like scientific reports and technical reports, farmers' expertise, tacit knowledge. And then we wanted to use and build small language models. And then we got other components such as knowledge graphs, and we got agentic architecture where we use multi-agents to actually go and find the right answer at the right time.
Great. If you want to hear more in detail, Srikanth will be doing an open ag demo at the Monkey Rock installation in the Culture Plots later this week. Ask me if you want details on that. But Perrine, from your research on markets and public sentiment, is the business case actually there for democratized agricultural AI?
I think definitely what we see is large companies, they still are responsible for their value chain. And whenever we do assessments of where their risks lie and where the biggest impacts are for them, it's, with the farmers. And with that comes fair value sharing, accessing tools freely, etc. So that's critical for them because it's all about building, the making their value chain ever more robust, to weather the storms, whether it's environmental or whatnot. For governments, I think the policymakers, the business cases there too. You've mentioned it earlier, food security. Give me one government around the world right now that's not talking about food sovereignty, for example, or one government that's not shit scared, like in the EU right now, about farmers taking onto the streets, right? So anything that can help farmers be able to deliver what they need within, also the very difficult context that they're facing will be very much welcome. I guess the one player that we need to think about as we advocate for our work as OpenAI is the big AI companies out there. What do we need from, they are still actors, whether or not, we push this open system. So how do we engage them? What's the advocacy play with them? That's, I think, an open question.
Yeah. Dr. Desbier, what are some of those institutional and research barriers to scaling this? What infrastructure or partnerships need to exist?
There are many different ways of looking at this. One dimension which is really has been a strength of the U.S. research funding system is any research done with public money from the NSF or NIH has to be public. The data and the data has been out there. Now that is a fundamental principle of funding in U.S. We as a global community need to emphasize on that. Make sure it becomes a global value for all research, so that science doesn't get trapped in corporate value chains, like you said. Now another thing is, if you I'm responsible for getting patents, at my university. One of the fundamental criteria for getting a patent is, has this research or knowledge, is it already in the public domain? If it's already in the public domain, you cannot get a patent. Now, this is where Open Ag, what we want is all this research that's happening in ag globally, especially in localized, contextualized environments, we want it quickly in the public sphere so that the patents don't get captured by interests that may have very personal interests or rather than public service as a public good. So I think those two attributes are very, very powerful. But at the same time, I think universities themselves have to ask themselves the question. I think this is a time for us to recharge our public service mission. If the government is not providing so much funding in this area, maybe universities can step up. Just like in the US, the states, a lot of the governors of the states are stepping up in the gaps. And I think I'm hopeful that all these changes and these transformative times will let's go back to the fundamentals. Let's build public-private partnerships. Open Ag is one example, a wonderful example. So I see a lot more public research universities stepping up and recharging open source. Not just in academic publishing where there's a huge need for that, but also in areas like farming and agriculture that has huge worldwide impact. Like you, my fellow panelists pointed out, this is a global issue now.
Yeah, and one of the things that we are working on with the Nature and Climate Impact team at the University of Exeter is not just on the infrastructure and the sort of policy side of things and which stakeholders need to be in the room and those sorts of things, but also in terms of narrative and how we change the narrative. For example, we have a campaign called Save the Flavors, where we're trying to help meet people where they're at on environmental change and how environmental change impacts some of their favorite flavors, like chocolate and wine and whiskey, and to try and help people better understand, better get their minds around exactly what's happening to the things that they love. And I'm wondering, Perrine, if you have some insight or some sense of what narrative or incentive shifts are maybe needed to help support this open source kind of approach to to AI?
Yeah, it's as for narrative, you always have to start with what's the objective of your audience. What is it that they're intimately trying to do? As a government, it's social kind of cohesion, security, and so forth. So focusing on that. Sometimes when we talk about technology, we have a tendency to talk a lot about the technology itself, the hype around the AI, but what does it do effectively to serve your goals as a policymaker or your goals as a corporate, so you don't take it and put it in closed models, right? So that's very critical, and there's one actor, you've mentioned it, Josh, it's the consumer, right? The end consumer does really want to know where his food comes from, how it was made, by whom, almost. So this is also giving us an opportunity to open as well the information on that and create a new narrative to get people closer to the food that they love and that they eat and consume. So it's very important for us as we, also try and embark universities to make sure we have the right narrative to get others along as well.
I'm curious to hear from the two IAAIR representatives in the room. Have you sensed some sense of narrative shift in the way that you talk about these things with government players? Have you tried to sort of change the way you talk about it? Has that been successful?
Me? So yes, and let me. I had to learn how to take what is oftentimes very technical and explain it in terms that maybe someone in the political sphere or policy sphere is. And here's the way I explain it. I said, nobody goes and gets a PhD on everything. And this idea that we can build a model that has a PhD on everything is just not going to work. And we know that. Everyone in the space knows that, okay? So you go and you spend more than half of your life getting a PhD on something very niche, okay? So what we estimate between 5,000 and 10,000 of these small models need to be built specifically for agriculture. And even more than that, they're specific to a type of growing. You don't train a model on regenerative agriculture the same way as you would for conventional. Okay, and even organic is different than regenerative. Those that are in the space know. Okay, so you start to take those three things, and all of a sudden you realize how many models need to be built. Okay, so you're going to go and you're going to get a PhD on that one thing. That is a small model. But at the end of the day, we have to train one mediator at least. We think maybe three, but at least one mediator has to get a master's degree, we'll say, of agriculture. It is not an expert on anything, but it knows how to talk the language of every one of the other PhDs in the room. So imagine now we put one mediator in the middle of the room, and he's surrounded by 5,000 to 10,000 PhDs, and the farmer asks that mediator a question. Man, that mediator has to know all the experts in the room. He needs to know, I'm talking to someone who wants to do regenerative farming, and this is what his farm looks like, and he needs to go select, this guy's got expertise in soil, this guy understands my climate, this guy understands the market conditions that are coming in, and so it asks all those guys the respective part, and it gets information back at a PhD level. Now it's got to disseminate that knowledge back to a farmer who may not need to understand all the PhD level of all that in there. That's what we're building. Okay, and to do that and accomplish that, we can do that as a global consortium. That's a little more difficult for a private corporation because they're going to spend an enormous amount of money to do that, and at the end, they're going to want some kind of return on that. But what if a government says, and I'll just be honest, I mean, the U.S. has more capital to put into this. The U.S. has lots of farmers. They have a lot of history of research in this. So what if the U.S. funds a significant part of that, okay? And that's the conversation that's going on now. Well, the U.S. will benefit because their farmers will be better than they were last year, and there's more productivity, and that increases GDP and all the other things like that. Well, then those models now can be used as at least the start for when we're building and training small models in Africa and other places in the world that wouldn't have the funding to build 5,000 to 10,000 models for everything that can grow in Zimbabwe.
So on top of what Jason has said, I would like to add one thing. So the reason why we are calling it as a PhD level expertise is this. So if you take a large language model, and this is also one of the hindrances when we speak to governments and professors in AI, that's a different equation altogether. But for general audience, why don't we use this ChatGPT or Gemini or any such large language model and ask a question and get some answer. So I was talking to someone in Africa last week, and that person is a businessman, and he works in logistics, and he also has got some brewery units and other agricultural businesses. And what he said is, when I get a problem, I just use ChatGPT and I get an answer, and it's pretty good to me. So a farmer who really needs, the agricultural area is such a critical system. So we shouldn't be based on one prediction answer that has been built on every data set that is available on internet. So we need some sort of expertise. So when you look at this large language model, it's just a bunch of numbers with all the data sets. And if you really carefully look at that, there are just a bunch of numbers worked on distance-based measurements. So in order to go and filter out the relevant information is really, really tricky. And that is the reason we are calling it as a PhD level expertise. We are going to extract that more useful information and fine-tune on top of what we have with farmers' expertise and tacit knowledge and build a small language model. And that's the reason we are calling as a PhD level expertise.
I'm reminded of a coffee mug my wife gave me that says a PhD is someone who studies more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing at all. Anyway, I don't know why I just thought of that. But Srikanth, let's get technical, all right?
Sure.
Let's get tactical. If we're serious about scaling democratized agricultural AI globally, what are the 3 or 4 policy or regulatory priorities governments should focus on for this year and next year?
It's a very interesting question. The first thing that comes to my mind is awareness. So as mentioned earlier, there's lots of misunderstanding about AI, what it can do, what it cannot do. So I think we need to have certain policies in relation to that and bring awareness to everyone. So, ChatGPT is not everything. There are lots of issues with, large language models, discriminations, biases, hallucinations. And, farmers are critical fields, not just farmers, even healthcare professionals. They cannot just rely on it. So we need to bring awareness. And the second one is, I always, think like this, and I always teach my students, any AI model is data hungry. And it is not, when I say data hungry, it requires a lot of data, lots of data. And it is not just the amount of data, it's the quality of the data. It is the diversified nature of the data. So we need to understand the data collection strategies and have some policies which data needs to be collected and which data needs to be used in terms of building models. And the last thing is trustworthiness. So we also call as trustworthy AI. So once we have the answer from these so-called language models, how trustworthy it can be. So what exactly is the basis for that trustworthiness? I think we need to set up policies surrounding that as well.
Great. So now we know what needs to change. So we're asking now, what can you commit to, folks in the room and listening, watching online? We're at Davos Lodge. It's a gathering of global leaders in capital, policy authority, institutional power. Each of you is here because you have the ability to move the needle, right, in the room, watching online. So I'd like each of the panelists to maybe take 1 minute and make a specific ask of the room. Not abstract, not aspirational, but something concrete. What do you need from leaders gathered here in the room and watching online? Whoever's ready.
There are a few things I'd like to emphasize. One is, like Srikanth mentioned, it's all about small, localized models in agriculture, going forward. So the scientific world, the universities can take on the challenge, because the universities are global, of helping build on the platform small, localized models, capturing the scientific knowledge that very often is trapped in academic departments. Like, for example, my university is very strong in sunflowers and beetles. We have, repositories full of knowledge and, because over the years we have built up that expertise. Now, so we can do the scientific part universities, but local governments, all across the world need to take these models, right, this knowledge, scientific knowledge, and localize it, And I think if we do those two things, we will be in very good shape. So there's a global responsibility that the scientific world, and this is where I think, the fact that the research funding world in the US is in transition now, I think our federal government is probably looking at new models of doing science. And I think it's the onus is on people like me to signal to them, here are the models that you should be investing in, rather than science in the science funding. So we will do our part. And then I think local governments need to step up all over the world and say, hey, this scientific knowledge is available, how do we localize it, in terms of small models. Yeah.
Oh, great, thank you. In our research, what we see, and I think that's what local governments need to see as well, is the most trusted institution today in the world, it's academia and research. So you were talking about trust, right? Trust is at the core of it, so there is an opportunity to build on the trust capital that you've built over the years in your research, and that in and of itself will be so essential to then farmers embracing and adopting the tool, because they want to free themselves of any corporate constraints that they have, all of those things. So there's a great opportunity for you to sell also to governments and to players the trust capital that there is into your work. I think that's so essential.
Sure. Investment in open source. So what do I mean by that? And let me give you an example. So there's an organization called Hugging Face. So what they have is a full of models, and the impact is they open source a lot of AI models, and researchers can go and download those models and do some research, and they generate humongous amount of knowledge. And what I believe is, and because of that open sourceness, there's been research that has been built, and there's been apps that has been built on top of it. So we were talking to a lot of investors and also even not-for organizations to support Open Ag. And one of the questions they ask is what exactly is our returns, and what exactly is what is something that we are getting in return. So it's not something that we could get immediately. It's impact, generational impact. We are teaching students. In Open Ag, at Open Ag, we got open source data sets, working with universities, models, and all that stuff. So any PhD researcher who could come, who got a problem, and then just download the data sets and use the models and generate the knowledge, publish the papers, and someone in Kenya can actually read that paper and build some model, and it is going to impact that particular region. So it's really a grand vision at Open Ag. So I would say, just invest in open sourceness, which is kind of Open Ag. Yeah.
So 2025 was a year to build a proof of concept for Open Ag. I've been blessed to have had a number of successful businesses over the years, and so I felt like it's hard to raise startup capital when you haven't done anything yet, okay? It happens. But it's a whole lot easier if you've built something that's actually working and people can see it and they can be inspired by it and say, okay, let's come on board. And so that was the year. It was really think about what the architecture for something like this needs to look like, publish it. Let the rest of the world criticize it. We actually didn't get criticism as much as we had a lot of people say that could be probably, and many said that it's possibly the best published open source paper on a pathway to AGI. We don't say it's AGI, okay? Yes. And so that was great. Get it out there in the world, get comments coming back, start building it. Start at the same time getting awareness and trying to find universities and other early adopters to say, yes, we want to come on and be a part of that. Now that's moving. We had conversations with the USDA, and one of the early conversations was, look, this is like a NASA moment, okay? The U.S. said, look, space is going to be out there. Do we want to keep it open? And the nation, we led an initiative that created a lot of policies around space, the moon. It's open, okay? So that was done. So I said, if you guys want to take over Open Ag, that's fine as long as you keep it open. And so we've been running down that. So 2026 is we hope to build at least 100 or 200 of these small models. And while we do that, working with universities, and we cannot have 1,000 universities we're working with at that scale, okay? We want to work with maybe 20 to 30, okay? So work with those document everything, figure out best practices, really figure out how we can teach universities around the world to build these models so that 2027 can be the year that we open it up to the whole world. We have taught a few universities how to do this. They now know how to do it. We've proven that a university can build these models. And then I hope that by the end of 2027, we have 5,000 to 10,000 of these models that anyone in the world can do. So this right now is we strategically need more universities now for 2026.
All right. I think that's a great place to, sorry.
And governments.
And governments,
Because
yeah.
they're going to need the funding, because universities will not have the funding inside them to do this. So
Right.
we got to work with universities that have connections, whether they could be private though, and they have huge endowments. But yes,
Yeah.
that's the big ask.
Great. Well, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. The timing is perfect, actually. Well done, y'all. If you have any questions for the panel, we'll be hanging around afterward. We can answer them for you if you'd like. But let's get a round of applause for the panelists. And thank you to Davos Lodge for hosting us and having us. Hope the rest of your week in Davos is productive.
Thank you, everybody.